What if a murder victim could name her killer from beyond the grave? Not in a movie, not in a work of fiction, but in a real American courtroom. In the rugged, isolated hills of West Virginia in the late 1800s, a young woman's sudden death is dismissed by everyone as a tragic, unfortunate accident. Everyone, that is, except her mother. Fueled by a grief that refused to be silenced, the mother begins to pray for a sign, for any clue at all as to what really happened to her beloved daughter. And then, after weeks of agonizing silence, it happens. Her daughter's ghost supposedly appears, not once, but 4 consecutive nights, to tell a horrific, detailed story of her final, violent moments. This spectral visitation kicks off a chain of events that leads to one of the most bizarre, chilling, and completely unprecedented court cases in American history. This is the story of the Greenbrier Ghost, the only time in the United States where a spirit's testimony was directly responsible for convicting a murderer and putting him behind bars for life. Our story begins in the remote, rolling hills of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, a place steeped in folklore, superstition, and the harsh realities of Appalachian life. Life here in the late 19th century was hard, and people were intimately familiar with both the profound beauty of the land and the sudden, often brutal, finality of death. It's here, in October of 1896, that a young woman named Elva Zona Heaster, known to everyone as Zona, first lays eyes on a man who has just moved to town. His name is Erasmus Shue, a drifter and blacksmith who prefers to go by the simpler, friendlier name of Edward. From the very first moment Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, saw him, she felt a deep, unshakable sense of dread coil in her stomach. She pulled her daughter aside, her voice a low, urgent whisper.
"Zona, listen to me. There's a danger in that man's eyes, a darkness I can't explain. Don't you go near him."
Oh, Mother, you worry about shadows. He's a strong man, a charming man. He's just new to these parts.
But Zona was utterly captivated by the handsome, muscular blacksmith. He was a decade older, intense, and possessed a magnetic charm that swept her completely off her feet. Ignoring her mother's desperate pleas, Zona fell hard and fast for the mysterious stranger. Just a few short weeks after they met, they were married. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed like a happy, if impulsive, whirlwind romance. Then, just 3 months into the marriage, on January 23rd, 1897, the dream devolved into an absolute nightmare. On a cold winter day, Edward Shue sent a young neighbor boy, an 11-year-old named Andy Jones, over to the house on an errand, asking him to see if Zona needed anything. The boy opened the door and found Zona's lifeless body splayed out on the floor. She was arranged unnaturally straight, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The boy, terrified, ran to tell his mother, who then sent for the local doctor and coroner, George Knapp, while the boy ran to the blacksmith shop to get Shue. Before Dr. Knapp could even arrive, Shue had rushed home and, in a move that was highly unusual, carried his wife's body upstairs alone. He then proceeded to dress her for burial, a sacred duty that was always performed by the women of the community, never the husband. He chose a dress with a very high, stiff collar. He then tied a large, dark scarf around her neck, explaining tearfully to the first neighbors who arrived.
It was her favorite. She loved this scarf so much.
When Dr. Knapp finally arrived, Shue's behavior was erratic and aggressively controlling. He was wailing one moment, then fiercely guarding the body the next, physically shielding Zona's head and neck from the doctor's view.
Leave her be! Can't you see she's at peace? Don't you dare disturb my wife!
Overwhelmed by the husband's theatrical sorrow and aggressive stance, Dr. Knapp relented. He performed only a brief, cursory examination and hastily concluded that Zona had died of an everlasting faint, an old term for heart failure. He later amended the cause of death, adding complications from childbirth to the report. The wake was held at Mary Jane's house, and Shue's bizarre behavior escalated. He remained next to the coffin, his mood swinging wildly from loud theatrical wailing to quiet, intense watchfulness. He propped Zona's head up, placing a pillow on one side and a rolled-up sheet on the other. He told mourners it was to help her rest easier. But several people who approached the casket noticed something deeply unsettling. Zona's head seemed strangely loose and wobbly on her neck. It flopped unnaturally if not for the padding Shue had arranged. With an official cause of death on record and a grieving husband guarding the coffin, no one dared to voice their suspicions aloud. Zona was buried the next day, but her mother, Mary Jane Heaster, knew in her soul that this was no accident. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Mary Jane was consumed by a grief that was inseparable from suspicion. She simply could not accept the official story. She detested Edward Shue and was utterly convinced that he was not a grieving widower, but a monster. So, in the cold, dead quiet of the Appalachian winter nights, she began to pray.
Lord, show me. Please show me the truth. Let my Zona speak. Let her tell me what happened.
For weeks, her desperate prayers were met with nothing but an unnerving silence. Then, one night, they were answered in the most chilling way imaginable. According to Mary Jane's sworn account, she was awoken by a frigid presence in her room. For 4 consecutive nights, the apparition returned. Mary Jane was adamant that this was no dream. The spirit, she said, felt as real and solid as a living person, the room growing ice-cold with her presence. The first night, the ghost simply stood there, a silent, sorrowful figure, before dissolving into the darkness. The sight left Mary Jane shaken, but also resolute. Her prayers were being answered.
Mother.
Terrified but resolute, Mary Jane stared at the spirit of her child.
Zona, my child, is that you? Speak to me. Tell your mother what troubles you.
The ghostly figure allegedly replied, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves.
Mother, he hurt me. He was cruel.
The spirit of Zona proceeded to tell her mother everything. It spoke of Edward's hidden cruelty and violent nature. It described the final horrifying argument of her life.
He was angry, so angry, because I cooked no meat for supper. In his rage, he grabbed my neck and squeezed until he felt it break.
To prove its story, the ghost allegedly did something that defied all laws of nature. As Mary Jane watched in frozen terror, the spirit of her daughter slowly turned its head all the way around, revealing the broken neck. After witnessing that grotesque demonstration, any shred of doubt Mary Jane might have had was obliterated. This was not a mother's grief-stricken delusion. It was a message from beyond the grave, and she had to act. Armed with a story that most would dismiss as madness, Mary Jane Heaster traveled to the office of the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston. Imagine the scene: a determined, grieving mother, smelling of winter cold and resolve, before a man of the court.
Prosecutor Preston, I need you to reopen the investigation into my daughter's death. My daughter, Zona Shue.
Mrs. Heaster, I am deeply sorry for your loss, but the coroner, Dr. Knapp, has already filled his report. The death was ruled natural. There's nothing more to be done.
He was wrong. He was intimidated. My daughter, her spirit, she came to me.
Her spirit? Ma'am, with all due respect, grief can play tricks on the mind. Are you suggesting...
She came to me 4 times. She stood in my room as real as you are now. She told me her husband, Edward Shue, murdered her. She told me he was angry because there was no meat for supper, and that he broke her neck at the first joint.
But Mary Jane was unwavering. Her conviction was absolute, and her story, while unbelievable, was disturbingly specific. When combined with the other murmurs and strange reports about Shue's bizarre behavior, it was just enough to plant a tiny seed of doubt in the prosecutor's mind. Preston decided to take a huge professional and personal risk. He agreed to investigate. He ordered the exhumation of Zona's body. Shue complained loudly about the order, telling officials he knew he'd be arrested, but then added with chilling arrogance. On February 22, 1897, nearly a month after her burial, a team exhumed Zona's coffin. An autopsy was performed inside, a grim procedure lasting 3 hours. What the doctors found sent a shockwave of horror through the entire community. The ghost had been telling the absolute truth. The official report was damning. Zona's neck had, in fact, been broken, brutally dislocated between the first and second vertebrae. Her windpipe was crushed. Clear finger marks were bruised into her throat, evidence that she had been choked with incredible force. The everlasting faint was a lie. The complications from childbirth was a lie. Zona Heaster Shue had been brutally murdered. Edward Shue was immediately arrested and charged with murder. As he sat in jail awaiting trial, his dark and hidden past began to surface with alarming speed. It turned out Zona wasn't his second wife, she was his third. His first marriage had ended in divorce, with his wife accusing him of monstrous cruelty. And his second wife? She had died under mysterious circumstances just a year after their wedding, with some reports suggesting she too suffered a fatal head or neck injury. Shue was so brazen that while locked away, he supposedly boasted to others.
I told myself I'd have 7 wives. Zona was only number 3. Still got a ways to go.
The trial of Erasmus Trout Shue began on June 22, 1897, and the courthouse was overflowing. The case was a local sensation. Prosecutor Preston had a strong, if circumstantial, case. The autopsy findings were undeniable, and Shue's suspicious behavior provided powerful context. But Preston was in a legal bind. He knew that introducing the story of a ghost in court was inadmissible hearsay and would likely get him laughed out of the room. His strategy was to stick to the cold, hard, physical evidence. But then, in a moment of stunning arrogance, Shue's own defense attorney made one of the biggest tactical blunders in American legal history. He wanted to discredit Mary Jane Heaster, to mock her and her story in front of the jury. To do this, he decided to bring up the ghost story himself.
Mrs. Heaster, I ask you to tell the jury, on what grounds did you base your suspicions that led to this exhumation?
I had no suspicions at first. I believed what the doctor said, though it broke my heart.
Well, something must have changed your mind. Did you speak to someone? Did someone give you this information?
Yes, I did speak to someone.
And who was that? It was my daughter, Zona. She came to me. She told me her husband had murdered her, and she told me how he broke her neck at the first joint.
The courtroom was electrified. By introducing the topic himself, the defense attorney had accidentally made the ghost story admissible testimony. The judge, finding it difficult to instruct the jury to ignore testimony the defense had personally solicited, allowed it to stand. For the jury, Mary Jane's testimony was profoundly and utterly compelling. They believed her. When it was his turn to testify, Shue was a disaster. He contradicted himself, lost his temper, and failed to convince anyone of his innocence. One newspaper reported he made an unfavorable impression on the spectators. The jury deliberated for just 1 hour and 10 minutes. On July 11, 1897, they returned with the verdict: guilty of murder. Edward Shue was sentenced to life. Days later, a lynch mob formed to enact their own justice, but the sheriff moved Shue to the state penitentiary in Moundsville for his own safety. He died there just 3 years later during an epidemic in March of 1900. If you found this story as mind-blowing as I did, be sure to smash that subscribe button and give this video a like for more insane stories from the past. Now I have to know what you believe really happened. Was it a grieving mother's powerful intuition? A clever, calculated lie to force an investigation? Or did the spirit of Zona Heaster Shue literally solve her own murder from beyond the grave? Let me know your theories in the comments below. To this day, the conviction of Edward Shue is the only case of its kind in American legal history. While the verdict was officially secured by the medical evidence, no one can deny that the ghost story is the sole reason that evidence was ever uncovered. Without Mary Jane Heaster's persistence and her haunting tale, Zona's body would have remained buried, her secret taken to the grave, and a serial abuser and murderer would have been free to find his fourth wife. If you visit Greenbrier County today, you can find a state historical marker near the cemetery where Zona is buried. It reads, "Interred in nearby cemetery is Zona Heaster Shue. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband, Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer." After the trial, Mary Jane Heaster reported that Zona's ghost was never seen again. Her story had been told, and justice, through whatever means, had finally been served. It leaves all of us with one haunting question. How far would you go to make sure a loved one's voice is heard, even if it's from beyond the grave?